On a sleepy Sunday morning in 1941, the Hawaiian island of Oahu could not have seemed more peaceful or idyllic, even with the relatively recent arrival of the United States Pacific Fleet, which had been moved from San Diego to its new main base at Pearl Harbor. The presence of this fleet appeared to signify nothing more than a display of American naval prestige. Lined up off Ford Island were 7 of the most powerful battleships of the United States. That part of the harbor had become known, appropriately, as Battleship Row, and the sight of these seemingly invincible vessels was meant to convince everyone that American power was unquestionable. And yet, the sun was rising, both literally and figuratively, casting its rays upon an immense fleet of aircraft that buzzed through the morning skies and entered the pages of history. Today we will see rare, real images from that day that changed everything in history. At 6:30 a.m., the sailors aboard the ships anchored at Pearl Harbor began their daily routines. They woke up to what seemed to be an ordinary Sunday. Unaware of the catastrophe about to unfold, these men went about their duties, oblivious to the fact that within minutes they would face one of the most devastating and historic battles in American naval history. 15 minutes later, signs began to appear that this would be no ordinary day. One of the Japanese advance submarines had been sighted. The USS Ward was patrolling outside the harbor when it spotted a periscope above the water. The ship attacked the unidentified submarine and sent a message about the incident to headquarters. When decoded, the message read, "Sank enemy submarine 1 mile south of Pearl Harbor." "Well," said the communications officer when he saw it, astonished. He was certain they couldn't have meant sank a submarine. Perhaps they had meant sighted. That vital early warning was ignored. Had the message been transmitted correctly, the aircraft and battleships might have been prepared in advance, and the United States Navy could have avoided the catastrophe that was about to happen. At 7 a.m., the first wave of Japanese aircraft was approximately 130 miles, about 210 kilometers, from Pearl Harbor. Now, going back a few months, to April of that same year, pilots of the Imperial Japanese Navy began to practice simulated attacks against U.S. ships. As these pilots trained, they gained more experience, which could then be incorporated into the overall plan. To assist them, Japanese admirals had a massive model of Pearl Harbor built, allowing them to finalize every detail of the attack plan. But to perfect it, they needed intelligence. Enter Takeo Yoshikawa, a young naval officer sent to Oahu to spy on the American fleet. With no more access than any ordinary tourist, Yoshikawa managed to gather a remarkable amount of information about the fleet and the surrounding airfields that protected it, simply by observing. With a large Japanese-American population on the island, he drew little attention and often sat in a tea house overlooking the harbor, watching the activity. Using his encyclopedic knowledge of American vessels, he constructed a detailed picture of the fleet's daily routine. Perhaps his most famous act was posing as a tourist and renting a small plane to discreetly photograph the harbor from above. This detailed intelligence was then sent to Tokyo, where it was incorporated into the final plans. In the final stages of the plan, it was decided to use 2-man midget submarines to infiltrate the harbor and attack American ships while their crews were distracted by the air raid. 6 aircraft carriers would stealthily approach from the north of Oahu and, in the early hours, launch 2 waves of aircraft with designated targets. After refueling, a 3rd wave would destroy vessels and facilities, rendering Pearl Harbor inoperable. A proposal to invade Hawaii was considered, but ultimately canceled. Until November, there were diplomatic efforts to avoid war. On November 20th, Japan offered to withdraw from Indochina in exchange for the lifting of sanctions and fuel supplies, an offer rejected by the U.S., which demanded a withdrawal from mainland China. Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto assembled a fleet with 6 aircraft carriers and over 400 aircraft. Battleships, cruisers, and destroyers also formed part of the main force. The fleet departed on November 26, 1941, gambling on the element of surprise despite the risk of detection. Yamamoto ordered his fleet to sail under complete radio silence, with submarines leading the way to avoid American detection. U.S. intelligence, focused on the Philippines, intercepted Japanese communications but ignored signs of an attack on Pearl Harbor. Warnings were repeatedly issued, but their frequency led to complacency. Admiral Kimmel concentrated limited maritime patrols on routes near Pearl Harbor, anticipating submarine attacks, while Lieutenant General Short tightened security at airfields, fearing internal sabotage, measures that were met with skepticism. The lack of unified command and the belief that any attack would target the Philippines left Pearl Harbor vulnerable. On December 2nd, Yamamoto ordered, via code, the attack on the base. His primary targets were the American aircraft carriers, but the USS Saratoga was undergoing repairs, and both the Enterprise and Lexington had departed on missions, making their destruction impossible. Even so, the attack proceeded, aiming to cripple the U.S. fleet and pave the way for future confrontations, even without striking the intended central targets. On the night of December 6, 1941, in the last hours of peace, American cryptographers began intercepting a flood of coded transmissions across the Pacific. Uncertain of their meaning, lacking the full picture, they expected the Japanese to strike Southeast Asia and the Philippines. But a warning to that effect never reached Pearl Harbor before the sun began to rise over Oahu. At 7:20 a.m. on the morning of the attack, an Army lieutenant ignored a crucial radar report, believing the signals indicated a flight of American planes, possibly B-17 bombers, scheduled to arrive that day. He said not to worry because it was a flight of B-17s coming from California. But when you approach Oahu from California, you don't come from the north, you come from the east. 7:40 a.m. The first wave of Japanese aircraft arrived over the island of Oahu. The peaceful morning was shattered by the roar of the planes, and a wave of fear and panic spread across the naval base. Out of the mists of the Pacific, like swarming locusts, they rose from the sea, from the southeast and from the north. Unknowingly, the United States, until then reluctant, would soon be thrown into the Second World War, forever altering the course of history. Until December 1941, the United States had followed a carefully calculated policy of staying out of the war, because many Americans at home did not want to be dragged into another conflict. They believed it had nothing to do with them. At the same time, U.S. President Franklin D. Roosevelt was eager to help the Allies, sending supplies across the Atlantic and also providing warships. There was, therefore, a very thin line that the Americans needed to balance. If Great Britain falls, the Axis powers will control the continents of Europe, Asia, Africa, and Australasia, as well as the seas, and will be in a position to bring immense military and naval resources against this hemisphere. Thinking in terms of today and tomorrow, I make a direct statement to the American people. There is far less chance of the United States entering the war if we do everything we can now to support the nations defending themselves from Axis attacks than if we passively accept the defeat of those nations. All of that would change in December 1941, when suddenly, out of nowhere, the Hawaiian harbor of Pearl Harbor was brutally attacked by the Japanese. At 7:49 a.m., the commander of the first wave gave the order. The attack on Pearl Harbor was to begin. 6 minutes later, the coordinated assault on Pearl Harbor commenced. The Japanese dropped bombs, launched torpedoes, and mercilessly strafed the Pacific Fleet and the air bases. American guns quickly opened fire, with a heavy volume of ammunition being expended. Dive bombers attacked U.S. air bases all across Oahu, starting with Hickam Field, the largest, and Wheeler Field, the main Army Air Force fighter base. The men stationed there tried to fight back, but the tight clustering of planes made them easy targets for the Japanese bombers. At Pearl Harbor, about 15 miles, 24 kilometers, to the west, Japanese aircraft had the U.S. Pacific Fleet in their sights. That morning, a general quarters alarm, battle stations, sounded, warning that something serious was happening. Dull thuds and explosions began to echo, growing louder and closer. The emergency message broadcast announced, "Air raid on Pearl Harbor." This is not a drill unprepared for the assault. The battleships had only minimal power available, and ammunition had to be manually carried by the crew. Meanwhile, Japanese planes flew close to the ships, with pilots laughing during their missions. The Americans had believed the harbor's waters were too shallow for torpedo attacks, but the Japanese had designed special shallow water torpedoes, causing immediate devastation. At 8 a.m., the USS West Virginia was struck by 6 torpedoes and 2 bombs. Chaos engulfed the fleet. The attack on Battleship Row advanced rapidly. In the first 5 minutes, 4 battleships were hit, including the USS Oklahoma and the USS Arizona. Moments later, the Arizona exploded after a bomb struck its powder magazines, sinking and taking 1,177 lives. The explosion produced fire and burning oil on the water, black smoke covering the sky, and the ship's interior engulfed in flames. Young sailors tried to escape by jumping from the towers into the water. Some survived, others did not. At 8:10 a.m., the USS Arizona was in ruins. The USS Oklahoma, with 1,000 men aboard, was hit by 3 torpedoes and capsized, turning completely upside down as water rushed inside. More than 30 sailors were trapped, fighting for their lives. Crew members tried to stop the flooding by stuffing clothing and blankets into the ventilation systems, but the water kept pouring in. Meanwhile, the Naval Air Station at Kaneohe was also in flames, yet the sailors there tried desperately to return fire against the Japanese bombardment. The first wave of attacks was coming to an end, but Japanese pilots made final strafing runs against the base. The airfields were completely devastated. The charred wreckage of aircraft, broken propellers, and bodies scattered across the landscape. American troops felt an overwhelming sense of defeat. The surprise attack had exacted a massive toll, leaving many stunned, enraged, or in tears at the sight of the destruction. At 8:54 a.m., the second wave of 170 aircraft began its assault. They were divided into 3 groups, mostly targeting the same objectives. With the base now on full alert, the Japanese plan was less successful. At both the air bases and the ships, the Japanese encountered heavy anti-aircraft fire. The American resistance was better coordinated. The sky was filled with planes and explosions, resembling a chaotic flock of birds in motion. After devastating Battleship Row in the first wave, the Japanese pilots turned their sights on the ships anchored at the shipyards. Destroyers such as the USS Cassin and USS Downs were heavily damaged during the second attack. Docked in Dry Dock No. 1, alongside the battleship USS Pennsylvania, they were struck by bombs and engulfed in fires fueled by ruptured fuel tanks. At 9:30 a.m., the Japanese targeted the USS Shaw, dropping several bombs on the ship. The spectacular explosion of its forward magazine produced one of the most iconic images of the entire attack. As the Shaw burned fiercely, the USS Nevada attempted to escape toward open sea. The second wave of planes dropped several bombs on the vessel, striking both the bow and the midsection. If the Nevada sank, it would block the escape route to the sea, leaving the remaining ships in Pearl Harbor as easy targets. The Nevada eventually ran aground at Hospital Point, escaping the inferno and keeping the vital channel open. At 10 a.m., on December 7, 1941, the Japanese strike force decided to withdraw, leaving behind a devastated Pearl Harbor. Concerned about possible American counterattacks and the risk of exposing his fleet to even greater danger, Admiral Nagumo ordered the retreat. Although the attack had been highly successful, key targets such as the fuel depots and shipyards remained intact, something that would later prove crucial for the recovery of the United States. In just 2 hours, 21 American warships were sunk or damaged, 188 aircraft destroyed, and 2,403 military personnel and civilians killed. Many of the ships were repaired and returned to fight in later battles. And crucially for the United States, the 3 Pacific Fleet aircraft carriers were not in Pearl Harbor at the time of the attack, thus escaping any damage, a fact that would prove vital in the later stages of the Pacific War. The reason the attack was so symbolic and so successful was that America had never been attacked in such a way on its own soil, especially in the modern era. It was proof that the Japanese were a highly mechanized and utterly ruthless force, capable of committing an act that could almost be described as terrorism, an act of absolute audacity and violence, one that not only had a strong military and naval purpose, but also a profound psychological effect. Essentially, it made Americans, who in recent years had been relatively complacent about the war, many believing that it would not affect us, realize that the conflict was now at their doorstep, whether they liked it or not. During the attack on Pearl Harbor, 68 civilians tragically lost their lives, with the majority of casualties being military personnel. A total of 2,335 members of the armed forces were killed, bringing the overall death toll to 2,403. Many of the civilian deaths were caused by stray anti-aircraft shells that fell on Honolulu, as defenders desperately fired at the approaching Japanese planes. Millions of Americans awoke on the morning of December 7, 1941, to the horrifying news of the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor. The devastating trail of destruction sent shockwaves throughout the entire nation. Hello NBC, hello NBC. This is KU in Honolulu, Hawaii. I'm speaking from the roof of the Advertiser Publishing Company building. We witnessed this morning, from a distance, a large battle in Pearl Harbor and a heavy bombing by enemy planes, undoubtedly Japanese. The city of Honolulu has also been attacked and has suffered considerable damage. This battle has now been going on for nearly 3 hours. This is no joke. This is real war. The magnitude of the tragedy began to unfold, and President Franklin D. Roosevelt acted swiftly and decisively. On December 8, 1941, the very next day, he addressed a joint session of Congress, delivering his famous Day of Infamy speech, a display of strength that would forever be remembered in American history. Yesterday, December 7, 1941, a date which will live in infamy, the United States of America was suddenly and deliberately attacked by naval and air forces of the Empire of Japan. The United States was at peace with that nation, and, at the solicitation of Japan, was still in conversation with its government and its emperor, looking toward the maintenance of peace in the Pacific. The facts of yesterday and today speak for themselves. With confidence in our armed forces, with the unbounding determination of our people, I ask that the Congress declare that since the unprovoked and dastardly attack by Japan on Sunday, December 7, 1941, a state of war has existed between the United States and the Empire of Japan. President Roosevelt was alerted to the events at Pearl Harbor shortly after the attack began. Because of the time difference between Oahu and Washington, it was early afternoon when Secretary of the Navy Frank Knox burst into a meeting between the President and his advisor Harry Hopkins, informing them that the Japanese were attacking Pearl Harbor. First Lady Eleanor Roosevelt recalled that her husband appeared calm and composed as he received the latest reports of the attack. But deep down, she knew he was furious, given all he had done to seek a peaceful resolution to the crisis with Japan. Moreover, the way Japan had initiated the war further angered him and his cabinet, as it was considered insulting. 7.5 hours after the bombs began to fall on Pearl Harbor, the Japanese delivered their declaration of war against the United States and Great Britain. Among those Roosevelt consulted about the attack was British Prime Minister Winston Churchill in London, whose country was also now at war with Japan. Coinciding with the Pearl Harbor assault, Japanese forces had attacked British possessions in the Far East, such as Hong Kong, prompting Churchill to say to Roosevelt, "We are all in the same boat now." As Roosevelt assessed the situation and what the coming days might bring, he confided to Eleanor that he expected Germany would soon follow its Japanese allies and declare war on the United States. Almost echoing Yamamoto's own predictions, he told her that the United States was not prepared to fight the war it had now entered, and that it would take time to reorganize American industry, shifting from the production of cars and refrigerators to that of tanks and bombs. He also said that, in his opinion, the country would have to suffer many defeats before achieving victory. Armed with this knowledge, Eleanor Roosevelt went on the radio that night for her weekly broadcast, speaking to an audience of shocked, angry, and frightened listeners. She reassured them, saying, "Whatever is asked of us, we shall accomplish. We are the free and unconquerable people of the United States." As she spoke to the American people in their homes, her husband sat with his secretary, Grace Tully, dictating a speech he planned to deliver the next day before the U.S. Congress. That night, he and his cabinet met to discuss the latest reports from Pearl Harbor. The news was horrific. Casualty reports were climbing rapidly with every message received, and with so many ships damaged or sunk at once, the U.S. Navy's Pacific Fleet had suffered a crippling blow in the crucial opening round of the conflict. The only salvation was that the American aircraft carriers, miraculously, had been spared. After a restless night's sleep, Roosevelt addressed Congress at 12:30 p.m. on December 8, 1941. He declared, "Since the unprovoked and dastardly attack by Japan on Sunday, December 7, 1941, a state of war has existed between the United States and the Japanese Empire." Within an hour, Congress voted to reciprocate Japan's declaration of war. The vote was nearly unanimous, except for one solitary voice, that of Jeannette Rankin, a Republican from Montana and the first woman to hold federal office in the United States. Rankin voted against the declaration and refused to yield to the pressure of her colleagues, even when she was publicly booed from the gallery. Explaining her reasoning, she said, "As a woman, I can't go to war, and I refuse to send anyone else." In Pearl Harbor, the USS Enterprise aircraft carrier solemnly entered the harbor on the afternoon of December 8th, where the crew could see firsthand the devastation they had narrowly escaped. The day before, they had launched a wave of aircraft in response to a possible sighting of the Japanese fleet, but had found nothing. Now, eager for revenge, or at least unwilling to remain idle, every man rushed to refuel, rearm, and restock the carrier, ready to return to sea. As the news of the invasion of the Philippines spread across the Pacific, for everyone there and for those back home in the United States and in American possessions around the world, only one thought filled their minds: avenge Pearl Harbor. The survival of the American aircraft carriers ultimately meant that the attack would only give Japan the 6 months that Yamamoto had predicted to decisively defeat the Allies, something Japan would fail to achieve at the Battle of Midway in June 1942. 4 of the aircraft carriers that had attacked Pearl Harbor would be lost to the U.S. Air Force, a defeat from which Japan would never recover, and which would become the catalyst for the fall of the Japanese Empire in 1945. Pearl Harbor left an indelible mark on the United States after World War II, especially with the onset of the Cold War against the Soviet Union. The U.S. began to fear being caught off guard in another surprise attack, this time involving nuclear weapons, and invested billions of dollars in early warning systems and intelligence-gathering technologies. Moreover, the United States launched a massive rearmament program to confront the Soviets, ensuring that, unlike on December 7, 1941, the nation would always be prepared for any war. To prevent such surprises from happening again, the U.S. adopted a much more aggressive foreign policy toward the Soviets than it had shown toward the Japanese during the 1930s. Meanwhile, in the West, most of Europe was under Axis control. Adolf Hitler had launched a massive invasion against the Soviet Union, but the expansion of his forces did not stop him from also declaring war on the United States on December 11, 1941. This stands as one of Hitler's most puzzling decisions. Why did he choose to declare war on the United States? In truth, Hitler's motive was that he believed he finally had the opportunity to show that he wanted to rid the world of what he saw as the evils of international finance and Jewish control over economies. Of course, he was completely wrong about that. Hitler was also bound by a pact with Japan, so he regarded Japan as a natural ally. And that is why, in the end, the war expanded. It was Hitler saber-rattling, without any real understanding of where it would lead. With Hitler's declaration, the United States found itself drawn into a two-front war. The attack on Pearl Harbor had thrust millions of American citizens directly into the heart of the conflict. One thing is to declare war, quite another is to carry it out logistically. For the Americans, this was a tremendous challenge. They would have to fight a war in Europe, and at the same time, a war on the other side of the planet, across the entire Pacific. This would demand all the industrial strength and technical expertise of the United States if they were to fight simultaneously in both Europe and the Pacific. Never in the history or memory of mankind has there been a war in which the courage, endurance, and loyalty of civilians have played such a vital role. Thousands of civilians around the world have been and continue to be killed or maimed by enemy actions. Our soldiers, sailors, and Marines are fighting with great bravery and skill on distant fronts to ensure that we remain safe. As we here at home reflect on our duties and responsibilities, let us think, and think deeply, of the example being set by our fighting men. As Japan and the United States waged war across the Pacific, they were fighting for strategic islands. One must imagine the conflict as a kind of game of advance and retreat, trying to capture stepping stones across a vast ocean. The more islands you controlled, the greater your dominance over the lake. Beyond these battles for small islands, there were also major naval confrontations, such as the Battle of Midway, which again came at a high cost in men and material resources. The Battle of Midway, in June 1942, proved to be a decisive naval battle for the United States. In the first 5 minutes, the American Air Forces struck 3 Japanese aircraft carriers, and a 4th was destroyed by the end of the battle. Midway marked the beginning of a more aggressive American military presence in the region. Help us keep this project alive here on YouTube by subscribing to the channel. Thanks for watching, God bless you all, and see you soon.